is Ethereum dead? We didn't see Ethereum go to the crazy all-time highs in 2025 like many people were hoping for. Instead, it only managed to go about $100 above the previous all-time highs before getting rejected. And now in 2026, Ethereum is looking weak. But instead of looking at that as a negative, I want to look at how this weakness could potentially create a major opportunity for the next bull run. Because while Ethereum does look weak right now, there is some interesting similarities starting to appear between today's market structure and the one back in 2019 to 2020. So let's take a look. Starting with the weekly time frame, Ethereum recently got rejected from its bear market resistance band for the second time during this bear market. And this is important because this isn't the first time we have seen Ethereum struggle at this level. Back in 2022, Ethereum was rejected multiple times from this resistance band before eventually moving lower. And if we go all the way back to 2018, this was also a major resistance level throughout that bear market. Every time Ethereum looked like it was finally ready to break out, sellers stepped back in and pushed the price lower. So when we see Ethereum getting rejected from this level again, it's hard to look at that as a bullish signal. Historically, this resistance band has often been a warning that the market still needs more time before a true bottom. Now, if we zoom into the daily time frame, things don't really improve. Earlier this year, Ethereum actually looked pretty good. It looked like it was finally building a healthy bullish trend. We had higher highs, higher lows, and momentum was improving. But eventually that trend line broke. And after breaking that trend line, Ethereum once again got rejected from resistance. What's interesting is that the current setup actually looks similar to what happened earlier this year. Back then we had a bullish trend line, price rallied into resistance, got rejected, and then eventually started heading lower. Now once again we are seeing a rally into resistance followed by another rejection. Of course, that doesn't guarantee the same outcome, but when you start seeing similar structures appear on the chart, it's definitely something worth paying attention to. And then we have Bitcoin. Because one thing that has been consistently true throughout Ethereum's history is that it tends to follow Bitcoin. If Bitcoin moves higher, Ethereum usually follows. And if Bitcoin starts moving lower, Ethereum almost always feels that pressure as well. Recently, Bitcoin has been rejecting from important resistance levels that I have talked about in previous videos. So if Bitcoin continues to move lower from here, it's difficult to imagine Ethereum ignoring that weakness. Let's say Bitcoin dropped another 30%. It's very unlikely Ethereum also wouldn't feel that pressure. And that's why my base case is that Ethereum is likely gonna go lower from here before it moves higher. But here is where things start to get interesting. Because what if that next move lower is what creates a major opportunity? One of the most interesting charts to look at right now is the logarithmic regression band on the weekly time frame. Right now, Ethereum is trading roughly in the middle section of this band. But the important question isn't where we are today. The important question is, how low could Ethereum potentially go inside this band before putting in a low? And when I compare the current structure to previous history, one period immediately stands out: 2019 and 2020. After the 2018 bear market, Ethereum first dropped into the regression band. Then it rallied strongly off that low. At that time, many investors thought the bottom was already in and the next bull market had started. But instead of immediately moving higher, Ethereum rolled over once again. Price moved back down toward the lower section of the regression band. And what eventually formed was a double bottom. That double bottom ended up becoming one of the most important structures in Ethereum's history. Because from those lows, Ethereum eventually went on to rally more than 5,000%. Now, obviously, am I saying we are gonna get another 5,000% rally? Probably not. That would be amazing, but we need to be realistic. The market is much bigger today compared to what it was back then. But what interests me here isn't the size of the move, it's the structure. Let's compare that setup to where we are today in 2026. Back in 2019, Ethereum first dropped into the middle section of the regression band. Then it rallied. After that rally, many people thought the worst was over. But then Ethereum came back down and tested the lower part of the band. What's important is that the second low wasn't dramatically lower than the first one. The market essentially formed a double bottom before beginning the next major uptrend. Now look at where we are today. We have already had that first move into the regression band. We have already had the rally, and now we are seeing another rejection lower. So what if that rejection eventually sends Ethereum back down toward the lower section of the regression band? What if instead of completely breaking down, Ethereum is starting to form a double bottom like it was back in 2019? That's the scenario I'm paying attention to. And something else that's interesting is that the rally from the first low inside the regression band was actually larger back in 2019 than the rally we saw in 2025. So while some people might argue that the comparison isn't valid because Ethereum managed to make slightly higher highs in 2025, that's just a number. The overall structure is similar. Again, it's not identical. Markets never repeat perfectly, but they often rhyme. And right now, this is probably the closest historical comparison you can find. Now, if that scenario does play out, the next question becomes, when could Ethereum actually bottom? Earlier, I said that Ethereum follows Bitcoin a lot, and right now my base case for Bitcoin is that it's going to bottom around Q4 in October this year. And if Bitcoin is going to bottom around October, it does make sense to think that Ethereum is also gonna bottom in October. And that's still my expectation. But if we look at the last bear market, there is also another possibility. Back in 2022, Ethereum actually bottomed before Bitcoin. Ethereum made its low in June. Bitcoin didn't make its final low until November. So while October remains my base case, I think it's important to stay open to the possibility that Ethereum could start to bottom a bit before Bitcoin. Maybe around June, maybe sometime during the summer. This move lower to the regression band could also happen around the same time Bitcoin continues to roll over and potentially retest the 60k bottom from February. Another chart worth watching is the ETH Bitcoin chart, because a potential June bottom for Ethereum could also line up with a double bottom for ETH Bitcoin. Historically, some of Ethereum's strongest periods has happened after the ETH Bitcoin chart had put in a low. So if Ethereum starts testing the lower part of the regression band around the same time ETH Bitcoin is stabilizing, that would be another thing supporting the double bottom idea. Now, another thing supporting the bear case is interest rates. If you overlay interest rates on Ethereum, you can see that during previous major lows, rate cuts helped create a more supportive environment for risk assets. Back in 2022, rates were moving lower around the time Ethereum bottomed, and the market liked that. And more recently, when markets were expecting additional cuts, Ethereum once again responded positively to that as well. But now things have changed. The rate cuts many investors were expecting going into 2026 are no longer really there. Of course, there is still a chance that we get some, but inflation remains elevated. The geopolitical situation remains uncertain, And because of that, the markets aren't really expecting rate cuts anymore here in 2026. And that's important because easier financial conditions have been supportive of crypto. And that's another reason why Ethereum is likely still gonna stay under pressure for now. So let's go back to the original question. Is Ethereum dead? Personally, I don't think so. The weekly chart looks weak, the daily time frame looks weak, Bitcoin is struggling, and the macro environment isn't exactly helping either. But if Ethereum continues to move lower and find support around the low part of this regression band, then we could be looking at a structure that shares very interesting similarities to 2019 and 2020. Now, maybe it plays out, maybe it doesn't, but it's definitely something I'll be watching closely, because the next major opportunity usually happens when people already stopped looking for it. I'm watching ETH against Bitcoin, and most importantly, I'm watching that regression band. Because if Ethereum is rhyming with history, we could be looking ahead to a major bull run. And let me know down below whether you think Ethereum has already bottomed or the bottom is still ahead of us. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. Comment down below what I can do better. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.